if you lose me, it's because I've dropped my phone in that stuff. So just it's just a baptism together as we go into
You-
the deep waters of grief, and then beneath that, the deep waters of
I know.
merriment.
Welcome, friends, to the Wicked Truth Podcast, where we imagine life after conflict. I'm Suzanne Ross, your host for conversations with peacebuilders who have learned from long experience how to free communities caught in conflict for something better. Now, a third thing is a term from conflict resolution. It refers to a work of art like a movie or a play that rivals can watch together and react to from their own perspectives. So, by inviting reactions without judgment, a third thing creates a space, a safe space, for rivals to respect differences and to recognize that they share a longing for a more peaceful future. When the third thing comes first, it becomes possible to heal from conflict and trauma that's recently experienced or trauma that's been enduring for generations. So we hope that Third Things First can be your place to renew hope for a more peaceful future. Today, I am delighted to welcome my friend, scholar, peacebuilder, and author Andrew DeCort to Third Things First. Andrew, welcome. We're delighted to have you. You, my friend, have been called a dissident theologian by your friends, and you have, I think, embraced that way of talking about yourself. Um, I want to ask you what qualifies someone to be a dissident theologian, because you have some pretty establishment credentials. You earned a PhD in religious and political ethics from the University of Chicago. You've taught ethics, public theology, peace and conflict studies, Ethiopian studies at Wheaton College, the Ethiopian Graduate School of Theology, and Bonn University. So, Andrew, what qualifies you to be a dissident theologian?
Well, Suzanne, thank you for your hospitality and trust here on your show. This is a great honor and an even greater joy. The first thing that I might say qualifies one to be a dissident theologian is doing this podcast in the bathtub, where I currently find myself. But it's the work of being willing to dissent from the established dualisms that have governed what it means to be a person or to inhabit a faith community or to be a citizen of a political order where you are asked to align with this or that Greek, Democrat, Republican,
Yeah.
traditional, progressive, Christian, otherwise white, black. We have all sorts of labels and categories that ultimately set up this dyad, this binary, this dualism of us versus them. And when we just gently step out of that and put the third things first, then we can be perceived as dissidents. And I do think that's something that we get called by our friends. It's not something that we label ourselves with. I don't think anyone aspires to be in dissent or dissident or discordant from the symphony of our society, but it's part of the unintended consequences of the work of processing anger, descending deeper into grief, and then finding our home in that nonviolent peace that I think is our starting point, but it's also our destiny.
Yes. Yeah, I think you're right, Andrew, that that term can encompass anyone who is trying to live into a unity and live into the seeing the humanity of everyone, whether you've been taught to divide yourself up from them or not. I mean, you work, you've been working for years with what you call the neighbor love movement. And I think that really embodies what you're talking about here, because you are trying to expand, following Jesus, expanding who a neighbor is and what love means, in the context of that expanding idea, right, of who a neighbor is, and breaking out of those divides. So we just say just a little bit about the neighbor love movement, because we're going
Um,
to be um, circling all around and through it in this conversation.
yeah, thank you, Suzanne, and thank you for your support for the neighbor love movement across the years. For me, I just recently published a book called Regarding Golden Rule, How the Ancient Ethic of Neighbor Love Can Heal the World. And in that book, I describe, oh, there you go. I describe a neighbor as someone that we see as morally connected to us and equally precious and valued.
Mhm.
The neighbor is just anybody who we see as morally connected to us and equally precious and value. And neighbor love means passionate will and practical work for our mutual well-being. When we begin to see one another as neighbors instead of as, you know, family, friends, strangers, and enemies, we enter into a new mutuality in which my well-being is not truly well if it competes against or takes away from your well-being. You know, this is what the beautiful Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh call interbeing. And neighbor love um, is an abolition movement in the face of othering. And I describe othering not as a kind of fancy academic term or as, maybe an allergic elitist term, but as a helpful tool for making
Mhm.
sense of what we feel, what we think, what we see, what we build. And othering just means seeing other people as unrelated or less than ourselves. Unrelated or less than ourselves. And this way of othering um, structures so much of what we see in our society today. We call them, we call them illegals, we call them aliens, we call them domestic terrorists, narco terrorists. We have all kinds of labels that we like to slap on other people so that we no longer see them as neighbors, as was morally connected, equally precious people. And when we embrace the vocation of neighbor love, whether it's from Moses or from Jesus or from Muhammad or from just a secular moral leader like Václav Havel, we do enter into this dissident work of abolishing othering. And of course, the spirit of neighbor love isn't to abolish anything. It's to build. It is to heal. It is to belong. But again, a kind of unintended consequence of neighbor love is that it joins the struggle of seeking to abolish the presence of othering starting within ourselves and including our
Yeah.
othering of ourselves. And then it grows into the abolition of othering, whether it's in our legal system, our policing system, our cultural system, our family systems. Um, so this is what the neighborhood movement is just essentially seeking to inherit and to continue. It's nothing new. It's nothing that's, ultimately our own. It's simply an inheritance and a lineage and a movement that we're wanting to take seriously and say, um, really just an invitation. Let's make this our life's work. Let's not keep this implicit. Let's make it explicit and consciously, courageously, and cheerfully embrace this as our core vocation in our time.
Yeah. And what it leads to, Andrew, is this sort of this discovery that um, it's strange. I mean, othering continues not because it doesn't work or provide some structure and benefits that we all long for. It continues because people benefit from it. What happens when you dissenting from that system that has so many people entangled in it and benefiting from it is you become a dissident, right? That you perceived as someone who's reckoned the way things work. And so what I wanted to talk about with you today is the complicated emotions that are swirl around this work and that either can be an obstacle to the work or really enhance or enable the work to go forward. This work of building a more inclusive world, a more loving world, a more neighborly world, shall we say? Um, and so I did want to talk with you about grief in the work of building a better world because it's not something we normally think of as part of the work of conflict resolution or peace building. But before we do grief, I realized just from my own life and from talking with you that we might better take a step back and start with another very powerful emotion, which is anger. And anger is something that we encounter, one of my favorite third things has been Wicked, the musical, for a long time, because of the way it dramatizes some of these questions for us to help us think about them. And the main character, Elphaba, is a woman of incredible gifts and strengths and power and compassion. And she's someone who has been hurt and victimized herself. And yet she has a heart big enough to care about other people and other suffering. But the way she reacts, her initial reaction to suffering is anger. It's like those first scenes in the movie of the musical. I think you've seen the first movie, Andrew. She's like causes a lot of property damage, shall we say, in the way she reacts when she thinks her sister is in danger or this poor little lion cub that's been imprisoned. She thinks it's suffering. And so, um, sometimes anger is justified, right? Anger, like for her to be angry about those things makes sense. But what I wanted to connect with you about is sort of the pluses and minuses of anger. Like when we feel anger, um, especially around something that feels so urgent, which is what we see with Elphaba. Oh my goodness. And I want to bring it into real life too, Andrew, this life, this side of the rainbow, as I like to say. You were recently in Minneapolis participating in a nonviolent direct action because there was an urgent need to respond to what ICE was doing on the streets of that city. And it was we couldn't sit around and wait. And I do want to celebrate the fact that the nonviolent response was very effective.
Yes.
ICE has withdrawn. No one admits they were wrong, but but they're gone, and that's all we care about. And I think sometimes when we're engaged in peace building, we forget to celebrate the good things than the accomplishments. So I want to
Sure.
celebrate that with you. But also, you talked about what you were responding to in that time was what you called a moral emergency. And I think we see that in Elphaba's reaction. And I would like you to just unpack that word for us for a minute, a moral emergency, and where you see anger fitting into our responses to that, the good and the bad of feeling angry.
Um, Thank you. Thank you, Suzanne. You're the expert on Wicked, but it's just coming up for me right now that Alpha is green, and we may typically associate that shade of green with nausea or with disgust, or with the kind of bile that lives inside of the bowels. of a human being who experiences a moral emergency. And I'm thinking of James Baldwin's line. It took me years of vomiting up the filth that I'd been taught about myself to feel like I had a right to be here. And I wonder if we could start just maybe a layer, I'm going to call it a layer higher, and that's with shame. And
Mm,
I think shame is an emotion that tells us there's something wrong with you. You are deficient. You are defective. You're the wrong color. You're the wrong shape. You don't belong. You need to be changed or eliminated. You need to be made into something that you're not in order to be acceptable. And this is really the aggressive energy of othering that is that kind of bewitching energy that wants to take possession of us and to,
mm,
as my old teacher, Jean Elphaba might say, transmogrify us, kind of turn us into a monster or a different version of ourselves. And that kind of um I have to say bewitching because I'd like to protect the word witch as a positive term myself, but maybe that demonic energy, you might say, really operates through the chemical weapon of rage and, excuse me, of shame. And
mhm,
that creates these moral emergencies that are really just situations in which belonging is in danger. A moral emergency is when our shared belonging society is um, put under question, is endangered, is occupied, is policed, and even executed publicly and inside the soul.
mhm,
James Baldwin talked about how inside of all of us there are these sleeping tunes that live inside, but we also see these horrific executions happening in the streets of Minneapolis, for example, with Renee Good and with Alex Creddy, but of course with George Floyd and with Eric Gardner and Tom McDonald in Chicago and elsewhere. And when belonging is in danger, you do feel what Martin Luther King Jr. called a fierce urgency of now. And there's
mm,
ignition of energy that says we must intervene. We cannot accept this as normal. And the the energy of the ignition is anger for many of us at least.
mm,
And that anger is kind of like a burning fire. For me at least, it's a high heat. And it's I can feel it in my face, I can feel it in my hands, I can feel it in my gut. And for me, the anger says this needs to change. This cannot go on unchallenged. And the beautiful black lesbian poet, Professor Audre Lorde, said that our anger is packed with information, and our challenge is to turn toward it rather than to turn us from it. Or as the therapist um, Richard Schwartz might say, that the work is to learn how to speak for our anger rather than speaking from our anger, which is that integrating work of befriending our anger and understanding it. And I would say that anger is just like a fire. It's a neutral energy. It can warm, it can fuel, it can purify, it can illuminate, it can make beauty. um, Suzanne, I just had a really beautiful, painful, beautiful ceremony the night that I moved out of our house after our house was um, visited, I shall say, by pro-life people who nearly banged our door down and vandalized our car. I wrote all kinds of ugly messages on our car. I had a little ceremony where I burned some things that I needed to let go of, not in the spirit of rejection, but just of surrender, including my dad's desk, where I wrote two of my books and like 50 copies of my doctoral dissertation and the running shoes that I used when I was really going through a time of profound emptiness and some suicidal ideation in 2023. That fire was beautiful and it was
mm,
cleansing. and it was warming and illuminating. But of course, the fire, when it was not properly tended, our friend Garrett Haynes talks about the location of becoming, I can't remember the exact language he used, but like a fire tender, someone,
Yeah.
did someone,
Firekeeper.
fire keeper.
Firekeeper.
I think that's it.
Yeah.
Fire keeper. Fire can burn the house down. Fire can rage wild. Fire can burn and maim and kill. And so I say this, Suzanne, just with a sense of deep reverence, that the spot where George Floyd was murdered in Minneapolis is about 50 feet from a place called the Chicago Fire Arts Center, where there's cauldrons and furnaces inside, and these people make beautiful artwork out of hard metal and high heat. And it's really significant to me that the fire arts studio is right there where George Floyd was murdered, because this is our work of learning how to turn towards our anger, to discover the information inside our anger, and then learning how to work with it, like a blacksmith works with a cauldron, a furnace, a fire to make something beautiful. That's the constructive work of artisans of peace, if we shall say, who really have gained skillfulness and practice in working with like pretty scary temperatures. And I would
Yeah.
just say that, if you start at that kind of green shade, and kind of descend into that red fire of anger, that's the next stop in the journey downward really is. What color shall we call grief, Suzanne? What color is grief?
Oh, I don't know why purple came to mind, but
Ooh,
maybe
yes,
it's a mix of colors but
yes.
yeah, I think that's where uh, I love the way you've described that important work, because anger is like a fire and it needs to be properly directed.
Hi, this is Lyle, your editor for Third Things First. This has been part one of our conversation with Dr. Andrew DeCort. Join us next time as we continue to discuss dissident theology, the grief beneath our anger, and the joy that's waiting for us on the other side. In the meantime, please like and subscribe for more and leave a comment below. When has anger ever taught you something helpful? What does speaking for your anger mean to you? We read every comment and look forward to seeing you next time.